no one really talks about the emotional and cognitive side of a lot of these chronic illnesses. What are the emotions connected to the symptom? If you're able to kind of put that emotional flame out with logic, that's brain retraining right there. So many people have recovered from all of these different things, despite Google saying you can't recover.
We were chatting before we started rolling here, and you were saying how you like to make sure people understand that there's hope and that you can work your way out of a difficult chronic health issue and back into normal life. And that's actually something that you focus on for yourself and your programs too, is not only getting better, but how do you get back out there, get back enjoying life. And I love what you said, because that's a big piece of it. And I think it gets overlooked. You have kind of a pain to purpose story where you went through a lot of health challenges yourself, and now you have a program and help other people through those things. Can you start by telling us a little bit about your health journey? Did this come out of nowhere? How did it happen? And how did that change your view of the world?
For sure. Oh man, I'll give you the condensed version of the story because I spoke so much about this. It's like you could fit 10 movies into that whole experience of about 5 years of dealing with this, 4.5 to 5 years. But, there were definitely some early signs that were apparent after the fact that looking back, there were some obvious signs, but at the time you don't really realize it. So, growing up, I was just a regular kid, loved playing outside. I grew up in Vancouver, BC, had one other brother, was always a class clown, was always very active and playing sports. So, I was very driven. I was always that kid in class who couldn't stop moving. I'm like tapping my leg, messing around with stuff. It was hard for me to sit still. And I just remember my whole life, I was in go, go, go mode. I also had a very extremely high standard for myself. So I told myself I have to get good grades. I have to be team captain. I have to be the best, right? And while that helped me, throughout my life up to that point, fast forward several years, this was early in my career when I was doing personal training. It actually led to some pretty good things. Like I was one of the top selling personal trainers in the company I was around 20 years old, around that. And, I had gotten my dream car at the time. I had lots of friends. On the outside, life was looking pretty good, but on the inside, like I could feel my health was declining. All right. And actually a couple of years prior to that, reaching that so-called pinnacle state, I actually started experiencing a lot of these health issues. So it started right out of high school. I think I was about 18 or something, but lots of energy drinks, lots of pre-workout stimulants, coffees, things like that. And I started getting insomnia to like a whole nother level of insomnia. Now I always had insomnia growing up, just couldn't sleep. My mind was always racing, but now I really couldn't sleep. And then I started getting, now I know it's anxiety, but at the time I didn't know what it was. It's just like very restless. I had that. I also had a lot of palpitations. So these things started stacking up on top of each other. And then I knew it was getting pretty serious when I started getting exercise intolerance. This is around when I was 19 years old. And yeah, I just couldn't run for as long. It would take me longer to recover. I wouldn't get refreshing sleep. And then one day, this is when my life changed. I was in the library. I took this energy thing. And then next thing you know, I have the worst panic attack of my life. I thought I was going to die. I thought I was having a heart attack. Basically, I was sitting down and then all of a sudden I start feeling dizzy. The room starts spinning. And then up to this point, severe insomnia, lots of palpitations. I wasn't exercising as much because I just couldn't tolerate it. But I thought I just had to wait it out. Then at this library, I stood up to go get some water. And then next thing you know, my heart rate just jumps to like 160. And then I go to the front desk. I said, hey, you need to call an ambulance. Because this was different. Like my head was pounding. My whole body was pulsing. I said, hey, call an ambulance. Something's happening to me. So they sit me down. And then there's like 6 or 7 paramedics who come in within that 30 minutes. Now they're all coming in, giving me oxygen, checking my pulse. And I remember sitting there. It had felt like I was sprinting, but I was sitting down. Like my heart rate was 160 for about an hour. My blood pressure was 150 over 50. And that's definitely not normal. So they took me to the hospital, run all these tests on me. Like I can't breathe. Every time my heart beats, it felt like my whole body was pulsing, like someone was just smashing me with a hammer from the inside out. So they run all the tests. They couldn't find anything. And all they said was, hey, this is, this is low electrolytes. You just need to eat more bananas and drink more Gatorade, but you should be perfectly fine. But that was kind of the start of this 4.5-year journey where, yeah, nothing could have prepared me for that. But that's kind of how it all got triggered. I was just, pushing my body too much. I was also working a lot at the time, working 12-hour days, not sleeping as much. Just that perfectionist mindset. I was always reading books and studying business stuff to try to become the best trainer. But then my body just hit a wall and it's like, nope, we're forcing you to take a rest. So that's kind of how it started.
And then was that kind of the I won't say the end of it, but did it continue on like the direction you were going, say exercise intolerance or more fatigue, or what happened from then?
Oh yeah, it got worse and worse. So that day, it's almost like a bomb went off in my nervous system, because after that day, I had about another 20 more symptoms I dealt with: light sensitivity, sound sensitivity, even food intolerance, cold sweats, shivering. I was always shaking. Brain fog was really bad. Irritability, mood swings, headaches, and the body aches and pains got pretty bad. So, I tried exercising again after that. I waited a couple weeks. I didn't work for the rest of the week. I think I came back the following week. And actually my heart, because the heart's a muscle, my heart was sore for the next 3 days, as if I had trained a muscle. And that was terrifying. So I became afraid of my own heartbeat. Next thing you know, I'm having like a lot of anxiety. I felt like I was dying. I really did. The thing is, I go to all these doctors and I'm being passed around from specialist to specialist, running all these tests, and everything's coming back perfectly normal. So, they're telling me just get some rest and you should be fine. So I try to go back to the gym a few weeks later and, I have another little episode where my heart rate just goes through the roof and I have to go outside and like sit on the concrete on the ground. At this point, it's like October in Canada. It's cold. And then I just could not sleep. And then for the next 6 months after that, it was just downhill. A doctor giving me this medication and that medication. And, I just everything just dug me into a deeper hole to the point where I was bedridden 6 months after that. It was crazy.
And when did it start to turn around? What changed?
So it actually turned around years later. Now, I had times during those 4.5 years where I actually became functional again, where I was able to go back to work and work full time actually, and feel, I never felt completely normal, but I was functional. I was always symptomatic though, but that happened about 4 times. So I had to go off work completely, was bedridden for about a week at a time. And then after that, slowly, I don't even know how it happened. At that time, I thought it was just time. If I wait long enough, then my body will recharge its battery. And then I'd build myself up 6 months later, which is adding on random things. And then I'd be working again. Then I'd crash again. I had to start from complete scratch, had to give away all my clients and then build my client up again from scratch. Did that about 3 times. And then the 4th time is when I got really bad. And that's when I was bedridden for about 8 months straight. 6 months living at my grandparents' house. And this is after it's interesting. Every time I made a comeback, I would get higher and higher. So I'd recover. I'd be like, okay, I'm getting my life back. Then I'd crash really bad. Then I'd recover again and get even higher, but then I'd crash even harder. So it was extremely volatile with my health over those 4.5 years. But that 8-month stint being bedridden, even that, I could write 5 movies about that, but spoon fed by my grandparents, couldn't shower. And to the point where it got so bad, I was in the hospital for 2 months towards the tail end of that. But that's where I met my doctor. And he was the first doctor after about 30 or 40 doctor visits and specialists who said, "Hey, I know exactly what's going on. This is a hypersensitive nervous system issue, and I've seen this before, and I've seen people just as bad as you. You'll be completely fine in a few months. You'll be walking around. You'll have your life back." And then that's when I was like, "Oh, really?
But
Okay.
that was a relief to hear.
Oh yeah." I was like, finally, someone saying something about this. But up to that point, it was like torturous going through that process before I met him.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. And I mean, you've had a ton of symptoms that you mentioned, and now there's a lot of people out there with a subset of those symptoms or a similar case where there's just all this string of symptoms. Like, where is it coming from? Yet when they go to get tested, everything comes back normal, and it's just it is very frustrating and obviously scary when you hit those low points too. So then I find when you find somebody where like, okay, they understand what's going on, they've seen this before, it's like, yeah, it's just life changing because you're no longer feeling crazy, you're no longer feeling like a downward spiral. You're like, okay, I can there's a chance I can work my way out of this, and that this person knows the steps. That's amazing too. And you because a lot of people, you know, have to go for years. And I don't think most people find their doctor in a hospital. They have to find it somewhere else.
Yeah, yeah. Most people don't. Like, I've talked to people who've had this for literally 50 years, diagnosed cases, and they haven't met a doctor like this. And they spent multiple six figures trying to figure this out. So that's why I post so much free content online. We have over 1,200 videos on YouTube for free. I don't ask a penny for it because I just want to get the information out there so people can implement it. So on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, I am just pushing out as much content as possible to pretty much share everything my doctor shared with me, but also what I learned along the way in my own recovery. Because everything I share now online, that's a mixture of what he taught me, but also my own experience and also working with other people. But everything I have online right now, he really only taught me maybe 5% of that, but it was the foundation for everything else. Just knowing what I was up against, really, instead of feeling like you're fighting a ghost, that was a huge help. Just being able to pinpoint, hey, forget the label, forget the CFS thing, forget fibromyalgia. It is a hypersensitive nervous system. To be able to call it that and attack it as that, it brought a lot of relief. Because also, when you Google these things, which everybody does, because the doctors, if they're not helpful, then we start taking things into our own hands. So now we're Googling fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, ME. You're not going to find a lot of hopeful things on there. You're not really going to find solutions, or at least long-term solutions. And it's very confusing to navigate your way through this. And you're coming across these forums and groups online that are just very negative. And there's a lot of hurting people out there who I don't think they mean it or intend to do it, but they can spread a lot of negativity online, and that it affects people like a virus. So people have to be very careful of where they're getting their information from, and you have to protect your own emotions too. But if you're seeing people complain all day how there is no cure for this, that's going to start to get in your head.
So with all you've found and done and all that content you put out, where do you recommend people start if they have a hypersensitive nervous system, or if they have a bunch of confusing symptoms and they're hearing this and starting to put two to two together, think it could be possible for them? Where do you start with people?
Yeah, I think number one is educating yourself about what's going on, because the more you understand of what's going on, where your symptoms are coming from, why you even got this in the first place, it gives you a good starting point. It's a lot better to go into this kind of recovery path and go down this route, understanding what's going on versus saying, I don't know what this is. This fell from the sky. I'm just unlucky. This just not being able to explain what's happening. So educating yourself about what's going on is so important, but also it's where you're getting that information from. I'm not saying we have every answer to all these medical issues that people have, but people need to find someone or something that at least resonates with them, that they can say, hey, actually, it seems like I deal with exactly what this person is talking about, or what this solution is talking about. I have those symptoms. They have those symptoms. they have the same experiences I have. It actually makes sense. So if you find something that you can resonate with, that's a really good starting point, because you know you can relate to this person's story, or you know that they know what it's like to be you. They've been in your shoes. That's huge. Once you can resonate with them, then I think number two, it's looking for what's the validity of this? Like, is it actually working? Is this person all talk, or can they walk the walk? Have they actually done what they said they're going to do? So are they fully recovered? Or is is this thing proven to work with other people like myself? The reason my doctor didn't have to convince me to believe him was because, one, he was a doctor, so I knew he knew what he's talking about. But two, he looked at me like I was just another case that he works with. Not like, oh my gosh, I've never heard this before. Oh, you're dealing with that? Oh, that must be terrifying. Like, okay, well, let me look into it. Let me try to figure this out. No, he knew exactly what was going on, and he was confident with it. And he also said he's worked on this with other people as well. So the source you're getting your information from is so important. You have to resonate with it, and there has to be proof behind, what that resource does. Does it actually have proven case studies to go with it? But once you educate yourself with it, then it's just a matter of implementing it. So for a lot of people, it's not about adding in more things to your recovery plan, because most people who have this is their life. This is their full-time job. A lot of people aren't working because, at least the people we see, they're so severe, they can't even leave the house a lot of the times. Sometimes can't even leave their own bedroom. But they're busier than someone with a full-time job because they have to drink X amount of glasses of water. Their steps have to be within a certain range. They're so rigid and structured. There's almost too much on their plate. So a lot of times what we do is say, okay, what is actually moving the needle here on your to-do list? And most of the things are not moving the needle, right? So they're putting all their energy into things that don't really move the needle or push things forward. So it's simplifying it. It's like, okay, what do we implement now? And keeping it as simple as possible. So a lot of it is taking away things, use that energy to learn what's going on, but then also to implement what's happening. And that's always the first starting point. I tell people, it's educate yourself and then implement it as much as you can.
Okay. And then, so what are the things to implement that move the needle once things get taken away? There's a little more space, a little more energy. It sounds like you really recommend finding someone you trust, someone you want to follow. Say that someone takes those steps, then what are you seeing move the needle for people?
Yeah. So after you've done the education part, and you can really say that, okay, I understand what's going on now. I know it's my nervous system. Then it's implementing brain retraining, right? Neuroplasticity. And really all brain retraining is, it's just a fancy term for saying, hey, we need to switch your nervous system from this fight or flight and survival mode, this hypersensitive mode, to something that's more normal functioning, right? We're shifting from fight or flight to rest and digest, or at least finding a balance in between. And you do that by, I think the biggest thing is responding well to symptoms. People don't realize how much their emotions play into the symptoms, or how much worse their emotions can make them. And people can hear that and they can say, oh, Miguel, you're saying it's all emotions? You're saying it's all in my head? That's not what I'm saying. It's a very physical thing because you feel the physical symptoms happening. But the reason nothing is showing up on the tests, or actually the only thing that is showing up on the test, is that you're perfectly normal. The reason that is because the problems aren't in your body. They're not in your organs, especially if you gotten them tested out. Like, for example, people dealing with high heart rate or POTS or heart palpitations or chest pains. They got an x-rays done. They've gotten ultrasounds done and Holter monitor tests, and the heart is actually fine. It's functioning fine. Well, then at some point you have to believe, okay, I'm not at risk to just have a random heart attack despite the symptoms I'm feeling, because I've gotten this checked out by multiple doctors. So if your heart's actually okay, that still doesn't mean that you're not feeling those things, right? So now we have to look at it even deeper. You are experiencing those things, but where are you experiencing that? And you experience things in the brain. So the brain is essentially putting in these symptoms as kind of defense mechanisms to lock the body down to protect you from, adding on too much stress to your experience, basically. And stress can come in many forms. You could call it stress, you could call it stimulus, right? But in responding well to symptoms, you're avoiding pouring fuel on the fire for those symptoms. Because to stay in fight or flight mode, your body needs to fuel that fight or flight with some kind of emotions, with anticipating things and, being hyper vigilant about what's happening in your body. But the whole reason you're having the symptoms in the first place is it's a self-defense mechanism, not because your body's actually in danger. It's because it thinks it's going to be in danger because we've added on too much stress for it. Now, I think it's going to be important to distinguish, like, okay, what is the actual trigger that causes all of this? And very quickly, I'll explain it. It's the stress threshold, at least from what I've seen. Everybody has a stress threshold of how much stress they can handle, their nervous system can handle, right? So let's say this is the bar over here. Over time in life, you have other stressors come up. Maybe it's relationships, then there's financial stressors, then there's maybe personality stressors, where you're a perfectionist, or you're an overthinker. Maybe it's going to school and, maybe you have an argument with a loved one, right? And so a lot of people, before this becomes full-blown CFS or long COVID, fibromyalgia, they're kind of hovering right below that limit, right? Kind of like how I was feeling those symptoms. And then all it takes is one instance, one thing for the straw to break the camel's back. For example, people who get COVID, right? Now they go way over that stress threshold. So now the alarm system is triggered. So all your brain knows is that, okay, now my stress is way past its capacity. We need to go into shutdown mode, or at least freeze mode. And that's when it starts giving you the symptoms, because it doesn't trust the body or the person who's running the body to keep it safe. Because all it knows up to this point is if we've added stressor after stressor after stressor after stressor. We cannot handle this anymore. We need to shut the party down. So let's cause a whole bunch of symptoms. Let's try to put this person in a bed where they, in an extreme level, they can't move. So that way they can no longer add on stimulus to their body. They can't go out into the world and expose themselves to danger. So, going back to what I was talking about earlier with responding well to symptoms, there's people who are bedridden, who are not doing anything physically, but they're continuing to get worse. And why is that? Because they're not doing anything physically to drain their battery physically, though. It's because they're running a marathon in their head every single day, emotionally and mentally. Worst case scenarios, regret of doing certain things, or wishing they did this versus that, or they shouldn't have done this. That's more taxing and stressful than sometimes just going up and doing something physically. And I think people don't realize that, because no one really talks about the emotional and cognitive side of a lot of these chronic illnesses. And those things keep your nervous system in fight or flight mode, any kind of emotions.
Yeah. And do people, when you're working with them, do they ever push back on you and say, hey, what do you mean my stomach pain or GI issues or what are the heart, beating out of control, like these strong physical symptoms? What do you mean that's coming from the brain to protect me? How do you break it down and help someone shift?
Yeah, absolutely. And we do get that quite a bit within our programs, even outside our programs. But I think before anybody comes into our programs, we screen them, especially if we're going to work with them very closely one-on-one in one of our higher level programs. We do have to screen them just to make sure we're not fighting an uphill battle here, and we're dragging them to certain conclusions about the nervous system. Or if they're going to push back from the start, we just tell them, okay, well, this won't be a good fit right now. Some people are only open-minded to these things after they hit rock bottom, right? Because now they've exhausted all other options. They tried doing it on their own, tried doing it their way. It didn't work. And some people, they just get to the point where they're so desperate, they're open-minded to literally try anything. And those are actually the people who do the best, because there is no pushback. But when people do push back, we just have to remind them, Um, you know, you're here for a reason. You're here because you came to us because we're the experts in this. Like, you came to us for help. You've seen our case studies. You've seen all the people recovering. You see people on the calls and in the group recovering, right? So we know the methods here are sound, and here's where your roadblocks are. It's this and this and this. And, 99 times out of 10, they agree and they're like, yeah, you're right. And we seem to get more pushback when people flare up. Because when you start to flare up symptom wise, your emotions are also kind of all over the place. So you'll be more doubtful. You'll be a little bit more moody, I guess. You'll be a bit harder to coach. But if it becomes like a perpetual issue that is ongoing and someone is pushing back, then we just give them the option and we say, you know what, we're trying with you here, but it takes two people, or it takes both parties for you to get the result that you want. So ultimately, we're here to help you get your life back. We want to see you get to thriving health. You came to us knowing that, you had to commit to this. But if you can't commit, then, you could do this on your own or you could do this with us. Which option do you want? And most of the time people are like, well, I've been doing it myself for 8 years, but that didn't work. Okay, I'll keep going. But so we just had to be fully transparent with them, to be honest.
What kind of brain retraining do you like to do with people or find is most effective?
Mm-hmm. So a lot of it is, it's like in the moment brain retraining, and it takes, just a few seconds to do this exercise. So, we call it something as simple as swatting the thoughts away or swatting away, because a lot of times it's not really the symptom people are scared of. It's what that symptom means. So going back to that heart example, if someone stands up too fast and they have heart palpitations and they get a little bit of shortness of breath, they're going to feel like, if you're really anxious, you're going to feel like, oh shoot, my heart skipped. Is that a heart attack? Is my heart just going to stop beating? So it's not the actual physical feeling, it's the emotion and the story behind that. So when you're aware of those emotions, when that symptom happens, that's connecting to the symptom. What are the emotions connect to the symptom? If you're able to kind of put that flame out, that emotional flame out with logic, that's brain retraining right there. So what that looks like is you stand up, you get some heart palpitations, and immediately your default brain goes, shoot, what if I have a heart attack? What can my heart handle this? You have to remind yourself, hey, it's just a hypersensitive nervous system. It's not actually the heart. Your brain is just sending the wrong signals to your body. This is a glitch in the nervous system. So that's kind of that went through my mind. That's a few sentences, but afterwards, once I've ingrained all of these things, then it's as simple as, it's just the hypersensitive nervous system. It's just the nervous system. Basically blaming it on the nervous system, right? But you have to do that sometimes hundreds of times per day, basically teaching your body that it's safe and that it's not actually your organs doing this stuff. It's the brain sending the wrong signals to your body. And if you could constantly remind yourself that, it takes the fear out of it, because it's just a hypersensitive nervous system. And the thing that keeps that alive is the fear. So usually it's like you have some symptoms and then you have fear around the symptoms, and the fear only increases the symptoms. And then more symptoms equals more fear. So it's like a perpetual cycle. So you need to break the cycle essentially. But it's just lots of repetition. And you need that sense of feeling safe, even just for 1 second. Like that's all you need to start with. But that's one of the things we teach in the program.
Okay, cool. So you're giving your body that sense of safety or that reminder hundreds of times a day, however many times is necessary, having the awareness to catch when the racing thoughts, the worry, or these deep emotions arise.
Right. Yeah. It's preventing the downward spiral. So you think about it like a train, right? Train right now is at point A. That's where you're surviving. You're getting by, right? Dealing with lots of symptoms. You could be very debilitated. A lot of people, if that's point A where the train is, we're trying to get to point B where someone has thriving health. No limitations, no more symptoms. They could just go out and live their life and enjoy a high quality life. So in order to get from point A to point B, there's a lot of ground that train needs to travel. And hundreds of times on the recovery journey, that train will start to go off the rails. And just imagine that train is like your mindset, right? Or your emotional health, or just your nervous system overall. Whenever you have symptoms and you start worrying, you start thinking worst case scenarios, that's kind of like the train starting to go off the tracks, right? It's okay if it kind of does that, but that's where you need to course correct it back onto the tracks. And then you'll have another symptom that goes off the tracks. Because what happens if the train starts to really go off the rails, that's basically you in a downward spiral. And I'm sure we've all experienced the downward spirals where you're in this doom and gloom trench for days or weeks or months at a time. Your symptoms will be amplified in that state. And you're pretty much feeding this fight or flight mode in your body. So when you notice yourself starting to go down that route, starting to go off track, starting to slowly downward spiral, you have to course correct. And when you're course correcting, that's essentially what brain retraining is you're intentionally changing the default kind of pathways that your brain is going down. Because it's always going to go down the default route when you're in fight or flight mode of keeping you safe, which is giving you symptoms, making you think worst case scenarios, anticipating things. So you need to retrain it to access the other parts of your brain, which are more calm, peaceful, rest and digest, slower pace. And the cool thing is we all have that in our brain. It's not like your brain doesn't have those capabilities. It knows how to be normal. It knows how to live life without the symptoms. Because, just think about it. People who are dealing with this at one point, they were normal people, not dealing with symptoms. So the brain has just forgotten how to access those areas of the brain. It's always going to take the beeline towards symptoms, survival mode, fight or flight, worst case scenarios. Let's keep this person alive. Who cares how they feel? We just need to keep this body alive. It's going to beeline towards that option every single time. So we're just trying to redirect it so we can access these other areas of the brain. So just think about it like a software issue. There's just a glitch. There's like a misfiring. That's all. Once you fix the glitch, you get access to all those things again, and you get access to essentially thriving health.
With the brain retraining, is in addition to being aware throughout the day and then catching when those moments happen, is there do you find like a more formal practice time during the week helps? And do you use anything in addition to brain retraining? Are you looking at food or breath work or somatics, anything like that?
Yeah. So we actually don't even touch on food, especially like people with mast cell activation, for example. Some people can only tolerate like 3 foods. And they're like, what's the diet? What should I eat? And we say, well, we could give you the perfect diet, but at least from what we've seen, that's not going to really solve anything. That's not going to solve the root cause, at least for your specific case. So all the people who've come to us with mast cell activation, we didn't even focus on food, where food intolerance was their main issue, one of their main issues, because we just focused on fixing the root cause. And then next thing you know, a year later, they go from only able to eat 3 foods to eating ice cream, brownies, pizzas, like stuff that even I don't eat right now. And I'm like, dang, okay. So, we don't focus too much on food. It's probably less than 5% of the entire focus in the program, or our approach in general. And then in terms of time for brain retraining, no, there's no specific time. And because it's so short, sometimes you could do it as quick as 2 to 3 seconds. We just say, do it as much as you can. When you're aware of what's going on, implement it, because it's hundreds of times per day. You don't even have to do it for a certain minimum length of time. It's really just repetition and consistency. So it's kind of like those rock splitting videos. If people ever seen those rock splitting videos, but manual rock splitting, where they take a pike, hit it into a rock, it's a huge boulder, and they got like 20 or 30 of these pikes in the rock. They're hitting each pike one by one, right? No matter how hard you swing that, you can swing it as hard as you can. It's not really going to do much because it's a game of repetition. So they hit the first spike, then the second spike, third, they go all the way to the 20 spikes, and they do that again and again and again for days on end. And it may seem like nothing is happening. There's no drastic change. But what happens is they'll hit it a few thousand times, and then suddenly the whole thing will just crack in half, basically. So all that hard work has actually been building up, and then eventually that rock splits. So it's kind of like with brain retraining. You could do it over and over and over again. Eventually, something clicks. It's like a combination lock, you know? Eventually, something will click, and then you unlock the parts of your brain that are able to feel minimal symptoms and feel more normal. But it also works in different stages. Like you have to level up, right? Every time you level up, that's kind of like doing the brain training, boom, something clicks. You access a certain part of the brain. All right, we'll keep going. Brain training, boom. You unlock another level in the brain. So it's a very casual way to do it. And that's the way we like it. We don't like to be too structured, because that alone can stress people out, because, you know, a lot of people are perfectionists, and the other things they tried were way too structured. And if they miss one day or don't do it for an hour and do it for 42 minutes, they start beating themselves up and they're like, oh man, if I really wanted to recover, I would have done it a full hour. So why didn't I do it? Do I really want to recover? Like, they can get in their heads quite a bit. So we keep it very loose and casual.
Do you think that personality trait, some of these type A traits, does that make a person more susceptible to a hypersensitive nervous system? Or do you think there's something going on earlier in life that leads to those personality traits, and then a further extension of it is potentially hypersensitive nervous system?
I think if people have dealt with, you know, very intense trauma or very intense perceived trauma growing up, then yes, that can definitely be one of the factors that can increase the odds of somebody getting this. But personality traits, absolutely. You know, and depends how intense they are about their personality traits. If someone's a very intense perfectionist and very intense overthinker and type A personality, very hyper competitive to the point where they will value winning a competition or beating others or being the best over their health. So that kind of describes how I was before. They're definitely more likely to get this. In fact, I mean, we've had hundreds of people go through our programs. I think at this point in our programs where we work one-on-one with people, almost 600 people have come through, and probably less than 2 or 3% didn't have a type A personality. Almost all of them had type A personalities. So I definitely see it as a precursor. But I think you stack on that personality traits, or those personality traits, with other stressors happening in their life. Like you stack that with energy drinks, pre-workout, not sleeping much, and then some other potential life stressors like getting COVID, or, you know, studying for your PhD or master's, or having relationship issues, then it kind of creates this perfect storm. But those personality traits are definitely amplifiers of other stressors that are happening in life.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I was right there myself. I mean, I have plenty of type A personality traits, and it built until exactly what you're describing. Like for me, at one point in life, COVID was the straw that broke the camel's back, and this was early. So at the time, you know, no one really knew what was going on, and we all thought, oh, this is a horrible thing that's so hard to survive. So that was like a lot of the focus. But as the years went on, as I went to the next doctor, the next one, I pieced together something similar to what you're describing. It's like, yeah, that was a hit to the body. It was a bigger stressor, but it was a stressor. And it was because my stress level was already high, had a lot of hidden infections underneath the surface, and, you know, you name it, toxins and a number of things stacked up. And then that just tipped it over. But since that event was so strong, or for anyone, whatever their event that tips it over, we tend to hyper focus on that. And that's really the way kind of the medical system set up, maybe our society set up. It's like, oh, what's this one bad thing that got us that we have to solve that problem, and totally, you know, ignore the 30 years prior
Yeah,
leading up
exactly.
to it.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, it's interesting being able to spot these things. And I think a lot of people, by the time they're getting on a call with us or joining our programs, they've been watching us for several months. So they kind of know that they had a lot more to do with it than they thought. But there are other people who are like, yeah, I was living a great life. Everything was completely normal. Then I got COVID, and out of nowhere, my life turned like flipped upside down overnight. And I was like, okay, well, what was your life like beforehand? Well, I was working like 6 days a week. I guess I was working like 50 hours a week. Oh, and I did this thing, and I was working out 5 times a week. And I guess I was skipping some meals. And I was like, okay, so you think that didn't have anything to do with this stuff? You think it was just getting COVID or just getting this virus out after this trip? And then they go, you know what? I guess it actually makes sense now. Like, now that you put it that way, I guess there were early signs. I was like, yeah, I thought the same way. It's only really when you look back on how things were leading up to it, you realize, man, my body was whispering to me to slow down for a while. And then it started kind of talking to me to slow down in the form of symptoms. Then it started yelling at me to slow down. And then I kept going. In fact, I saw it as a sign to push harder because I'm like, why is my body telling me to slow down? This must be a challenge. It's challenging me. So I have to beat it. So you push harder. And then it just says, all right, enough games. We're going to take control here because you ain't listening. So then it starts giving you all these symptoms. So now you don't have a choice. But that's usually how it works.
Sounds familiar. So let's talk about what not to do, because I think these are a great point, and I think that can sometimes be more important than what to do, especially for the go-getter type A personalities. So what are some things? Food, I mean, that's a huge one. People can spend so much time worrying about it and also having a lot of symptoms around food. What are some other examples of things you tell people like, hey, put that to the side. Don't need to
Oh,
stress.
man. One of the biggest thing is get off of Dr. Google, because I'm sure you can relate. Like, and I get it too. There's good intentions. You're looking for answers because you truly want to get your life back. But, people don't realize a lot of the times you're shooting yourself in the foot in a way by going on these forums, Googling symptoms. Because, for example, if I Google rash, right? If I scrape my arm on some paint or something, I start getting itchy and I search up rash on my arm. If you don't do this, guys, but if you go to Google Images, you'll see someone with their like arm falling off, right? So it's always the worst case scenarios you're going to find. If you search up a mosquito bite on Google Images, we've all had mosquito bites. It's not that big of a deal, but you search it up on Google, it's going to pull out the worst mosquito bite you ever seen in your life. It's like someone's face falling off. So you want to stay away from the Google rabbit holes. Number one, that's probably the biggest thing. Do not Google your symptoms, right? Especially if you've had these things checked out by doctors already, right? Because what your brain is doing is it's trying to look for an explanation for what's going on. But in doing that, you're going to come across some really dark rabbit holes. So that's number one. Don't Google your symptoms, which kind of leads to number two is stop Googling shiny object stuff, right? Or program hopping or solution hopping. You're going to find something that worked for somebody halfway across the world. This is one, random case. And you're going to say, okay, they did this thing. All right, let me try this thing. And you'll try it for a week and then you'll say, okay, well, it's not working. So then you'll completely ditch that. Then you'll go search up something else and then try that thing. So it's basically every other week, it's trying a completely different approach. And eventually that you're just pretty much telling your brain that everything you try doesn't work. So you're going to have less and less hope for the next thing, right? So hopping from solution to solution, I'd stop that. If you're going to try something, commit to it, give it a fair shot for however much time they recommend. That's number two. But number three, I'd say don't listen to people who haven't recovered or haven't had this, right? And I'm not saying don't listen to doctors, right? But you want to get your advice from people who have done this, who have been in your shoes, not somebody who, they could be the smartest person ever and say, well, this study said this and this study said that, but I'm still sick, but you should do this, or you should take this medication. If they're still sick, do not listen to them. I cannot stress that enough. If they're not where you want to be, and maybe they're still a little bit sick, having some symptoms, but make sure they're where you want to be in all aspects, not just physically, but the way they think, the way they speak, the way they view the world. Is that what you want to embody in the future, right? So you want to get your information from people or sources that you aspire to be, right? Not people who are still sick. That's a huge mistake a lot of people make, um, especially going onto these forums and things like that, because when you're in the state, you'll believe almost anything. Anything someone says, you're likely to latch onto it, especially if they're fear mongering or throwing out special supplements that can cure you in a month or in 2 weeks, right? So don't do that. Don't listen to people who aren't recovered. So I'd say those three are some pretty big ones. Stop Googling your symptoms, stop hopping from solution to solution, give them a fair shot, and don't listen to people who aren't recovered yet.
Are there any measurements you take to quantify, or is that also fall in the realm of, I mean, because numbers are easy to hyperanalyze and put way more stock into than they deserve. At the same time, nervous system sensitivity, that can be a little bit, it's a little less tangible. So, where do you fall on as far as measuring? Not, I'm thinking about things like HRV or elsewhere, especially if I think it's common for people to run into. It sounds like what you have some people in your program do, where you hit a tough period, they'll start to question it, which partially makes sense because they've gone down roads that proved fruitless before. They don't want to go too far. But also, what you said makes perfect sense. It's like if the brain is in that mode, it will continue to find every road that has a roadblock, and at some point you have to step out of that rut. Um, how do you approach that side of things?
Yeah, in terms of measuring progress, we tell people measure as little as possible. Like, don't even measure your heart rate. Like, take the watch off, because they're going to be constantly checking it every 2 minutes, right? And as they're looking at the heart rate, it's going to go higher and higher. And it reminds me of I have an uncle actually. I think he's getting early signs of CFS because we'll go to dim sum. He'll have his heart rate monitor on. We'll eat a bunch of deep fried food, and the heart rate will be 20 beats or 10 beats higher than when we got there. He's like, oh, why is my heart rate going up? Well, yeah, because you ate deep fried food. But then in looking at his heart rate, you'll see it climb as he's looking at it. So, back to the original question, measuring progress. We actually developed a nervous system health assessment. So we can actually look at different areas of their nervous system to see how sensitive it is or hypersensitive it is. So we look at a few things. We typically like to put it into three buckets: physical capability, cognitive capability, and also emotional capability. So these are the three separate areas that we figured were the easiest to kind of pinpoint. And we can actually see, like, we do these nervous system health assessments with folks like every single month. And then we can see where they're improving. There's like a whole chart. And a lot of times it's like your capacity for these areas. How long can you watch TV roughly? How comfortable are you with doing phone calls with people? How comfortable are you with having conversations? Can you shower every day? Can you leave your house? Roughly how long can you walk for? Don't measure it, but roughly how much are you getting outside for a walk? So we look at the balance of these things, and we're able to pinpoint, what could be triggering your symptoms, but also where can we add on more activity? So it's finding a balance of these things. So it's tracking the improvements in those areas, but also the symptoms, the symptom reduction, right? Where are we expanding in terms of our capabilities, and where are we reducing in terms of symptom intensity or symptom discomfort? So there's ways we do measure that, but we more so do it on our end. And that's what gives us kind of signals for what to implement in their personalized plans. Because that's what we do a lot, as well as give them personalized plans in addition to the brain retraining stuff. Like the brain retraining stuff, they kind of do it on their own, but it's really what's the plan to get them to the next level, or how do we get them driving again, or doing groceries and cooking without going too fast too soon to the point where they crash again. So, we definitely have measures in place for that we created.
Very cool. Can you elaborate a bit more on the adding back things in, like expanding the life? I said at the beginning that's an important piece, and it gets overlooked. I think that's a really valuable thing that you're doing for people, because it's so easy to get sucked into the problem, over focused on the pain and how different the life is. So adding that piece back in is pretty magical. So obviously everyone's going to have a different life and activities. Maybe give a couple examples or just elaborate how what it looks like to start adding things in and expanding at a reasonable rate.
Absolutely. So I think one of the most common things we see, this is not for everybody, but it is common, is where they're physically challenged, where they don't have much capacity, like even leaving the house is tough. Even standing up, they could get a lot of POTS symptoms, and they're symptomatic almost 24/7. So let's say someone is couch bound, they're on the couch almost all day. To keep their mind busy, to keep them occupied, they tend to go on a lot of social media or watch TV, or they're looking at a screen all day to just help the time go by faster. But even though their physical capacity is down and they're resting as much as they can physically, so on a scale, physical capacity is probably down here and activity is down here. But cognitive capacity and cognitive activity is way up here. Because let's say you're sitting down all day, but you're watching like 8 hours or 10 hours of screen time. So it's still a lot of demand on your nervous system, but you don't realize it yet, right? So if we want to expand physical activity, we need to dial back the cognitive activity so it balances out. So if we lower cognitive, then it gives us more space in our threshold, our capacity to increase the physical activity. But it's finding that balance, right? Do they even want to add on more physical capacity, right? Or do they want to be able to go on screens more? Most people, they do want to add on physical capacity. It's very rare that someone's like, no, I'm good with just staying on the couch. Let me do more screen time. I don't think we've ever actually had that. But you need to pull back in different buckets, like, less screen time. And in doing that, naturally, you'll actually have more physical capability. But people don't realize that. So we have to tell them, right? We tell them, hey, if you dial it back on your screens, instead of 10 hours a day, let's do 6 hours a day. And let's actually break it up so you're not looking at the screen for more than an hour at a time, for example. Then you're actually going to be pretty safe to now go outside for a 5-minute walk. We know you haven't been outside the house for like 2 months, but you're actually going to be safe. So part of it too is having the confidence, knowing that there's an actual plan in place, that you're not just guessing your way through this and hoping that the body keeps up with you. So when we tell them that, we're like, hey, this is your activity level right now. Here are the parameters we want you to stay within, right? As long as you dial back on the screen time, we can go for our 5-minute walks outside. Don't go past that though. Not right now, at least in your first couple weeks. And then from there, we just tweak and test it. And a lot of times, once you find this rhythm in the body and, you start to recalibrate things can change very quickly. But also sometimes it can take months for someone to see that drastic improvement, but their progress can even like start to go back. Because if they're doing too much and redlining their engine, we might actually take things off of their to-do list. Like, hey, dial it back here, dial it back here. We need to kind of let your body breathe a little bit. And they can feel like they're getting worse sometimes, but then they have this hockey stick moment. We see it all the time. Eventually, boom, the progress just takes off. And they could make more progress in 2 weeks than they did in like the past 5 months. Like we could see that. Now, everybody, they're going to see progress like within that first month, especially with the things we have in place now, like with the nervous system health assessment. We can really pinpoint based on someone's symptoms, their activity levels, their history. Are they on medication? What's their personality type? From that, we can really pinpoint what are the exact things we need to put in place for this person. So now it's just a lot more accurate with the plans that we create. But yeah, that's kind of how you expand. You need to have a balanced approach to expanding. You can't expand both cognitive and add on a bunch of screen time and try to go walking more and try to hang out with friends, because friends, that's emotional. Even if you're laughing and having a great time, that's still stimulus on your nervous system. So it's adding in things in the right amount and with the right balance, depending on someone's goals.
Very cool. Because it's a delicate balance. So that's so frustrating, can be so frustrating to, constantly be wobbling. So speaking of that redlining, are there any key indicators that anyone listening to can keep in the back of their head if they're wanting to use this approach. Maybe they do dial back their screen, add a little physical, but then they want to be mindful of what's a red line versus what's just a hypersensitive nervous system that's worrying.
Yeah. I think a clear indicator of that is one, there is no reduction in symptoms. In fact, the symptoms are getting more and more intense over the weeks. That's one. Number two is if you're constantly worried about things and constantly thinking worst case scenarios, that is a sign that you are redlining your engine, because you are extra anxious and extra hypervigilant when you're nearly maxing out that threshold. And you'll notice, like, people will feel like a different person if they're out of a flare up than when they're in one. It's like your thinking is just completely different. And a lot of times you'll have a lot of irrational thoughts and irrational worries when you are in a flare up. And, if you're having irrational thoughts, this is where it gets tricky, because to you, it's not irrational. It's like actual worries. But if you're constantly in this worried state, that's definitely a sign that you're redlining your engine. So if you dial it back again, I guarantee you're going to start to feel, I guess, more breathing room in your nervous system. You'll be less overwhelmed, basically, which is another sign. Like if you get easily overwhelmed, you're definitely redlining your engine. Then we need to figure out, what are we actually doing to redline the engine? So that's where you look at your activity levels. And, if you're not doing really anything physically, if your physical activity is about the same, or you're in bed all day or taking it super easy, then you have to look at, well, what are you thinking about during the day? Are you constantly thinking about recovery? And if you're doing the right stuff, all the things you have to do, that you have to eat at a certain time, because that's stress. That's a lot of stress on your body. So that's definitely something to look at as well. Overthinking stuff.
Yeah. So let's close with the hope. What is the hope out there for people who've got sensitive nervous systems, dealt with difficult and seemingly unrelated symptoms? The hope to get back to some normalcy.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is realizing that recovery is possible, and that whatever you're going through right now, someone has gone through it in the past. I think a lot of us feel like we're the only ones in the world going through this, and no one understands this experience that we're having. But I thought the same thing too, until I realized there were thousands and thousands of other people doing this. Like even when I recovered, I didn't know there were this many people dealing with this until I started putting out YouTube videos, so there are other people who have been in your shoes, know exactly what you're feeling physically, but also mentally and emotionally. The fact that you have lost your identity, you're not who you used to be. The fact that it seems like everybody else is moving on with their life and you're sitting on the sidelines being left behind. The fact that you feel like you're missing opportunities right now, or you have to say no to things. I've experienced it before. Everybody who's sick, if they're at your level, they are experiencing that as well. But the good news is so many people have also recovered from all of these different things. Despite Google saying you can't recover, or like 5% recovery rate for CFS, which is garbage, there are so many people who recover, right? And there is a way out. So focus on listening to the recovery stories of people who have been in your shoes and done it and made it to the other side. And all it takes is coming across one story that you resonate with, where it's like, oh my goodness, this sounds like a carbon copy of my experience. Even how they got sick, even the symptoms they're feeling, that's exactly what I deal with. And now they're healthy again. Sometimes that's all you need to show your brain that it's possible to get your life back. So I just want to say, no matter what you've been through, how severe your symptoms are, and how long you've been dealing with this, as long as you got your tests and scans done and the doctors aren't able to help you anymore, it's likely a hypersensitive nervous system, and you can absolutely get your life back. There's a whole better life, whole different life after you recover from this, and you're going to be thankful you didn't give up and you kept going, because it's all 100% worth it.
Yeah, that's an awesome message, and I, to your point, can't be heard enough. I don't think it can be spoken enough, because it's still poorly understood, and so it's great to have people like you out there who are talking about this and making sense of it for people who can't just walk into their next door doctor's office and find out about it. So if
Mm.
people want to work with you or they want to follow more of your work, how can they do that?
Yeah, so they can find us at YouTube, CFS Recovery. We're going to be the first ones that come up. We also have an Instagram page called CFS Recovery as well, and a website, just cfsrecovery.com. And, there's tons of free content we put out online. I like to give it away all for free, all the information. And if they did want some extra hands-on help, let's say they implemented the stuff, but they're like, okay, I want to work directly with the team. I want to be on live group coaching calls. Then that's what our other solutions are for. And they could apply to join one of our programs. And they'll see the links in the descriptions in our YouTube videos. So, if it's a good fit, we would love to help people go from surviving to thriving.
All right. Well, we will link to all that in the show notes. Miguel, thanks for coming on.
Appreciate it, Josh. Thanks for having me.